The biggest mistake is to pull features away from the community. It always is painful. The best thing is always to think that if you're at a place that you want to suddenly create something that's more along the lines of a enterprise edition versus a community edition, it should always be you're adding something new that's innovative and desirable and usable that people are willing to pay for, than trying to take something away from the community. It is the worst thing to do.
Welcome to TFR Let's Talk. Today we have with us for the first time Paul Hinz, CMO of Loft Labs. Paul, it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Good to meet everybody and good to be on here for the first time.
It is my pleasure. We saw each other at previous KubeCon. Next KubeCon is already almost here. So I would love to hear from you. First of all, how would you, because you recently joined Loft Labs to lead their marketing effort, how would you explain what Loft Lab is doing in this ecosystem? What problems are they trying to solve? And second is that what attracted you towards this company?
It's a good question because Loft Labs, one of the first things I did when I came in was to look at the brands that they had. So Loft Labs is the foundation company. You can think of it like HashiCorp has several different brands. So we will announce that soon. We'll resolve that and show how our websites all fit together. The core product, though, that we've delivered is vCluster. So vCluster it's an open source solution for virtualizing Kubernetes. There's several use cases that customers are using it for, everything from solving multi-tenancy, improving the reuse of CRDs, lowering costs of Kubernetes and cloud costs, et cetera. So it's gone viral, and that was the main thing that kind of brought me in. They're looking to now build kind of more structure to their marketing. They've invested well in that area and done very good. So I hope I can bring in a good perspective of kind of formalizing the strategy and making sure we're growing and spending the money wisely.
If possible, and if you can, also share your own background so our audience will also know who we are talking to today.
So I am an engineer background, and that's interesting. I think we talked about that earlier, about how when I first went from engineering, I then went into becoming a solutions architect, systems engineer for Sun Microsystems, and did several different products there in the Bay Area, then the West Coast, then all the United States. And then from there went into like technical product management, and then ultimately moving up to be lead of product management for all the middleware at Sun Microsystems. So I've been in that area for quite a while. I was also head of product marketing for all the middleware at Red Hat, but then also CMO at Liferay. And that was one where it was interesting to know that as you move from these technical roles into marketing, how does the technical community listen to what you say? And we were talking about a funny story where when I first went into Liferay, I was a technical expert in that subject area. So I wrote a nice little paper, and we did a nice webinar. I think we had 800 attendees at the webinar. And we were just basically saying what was going to be the future of that technology area. And in the article, I remember one of the first comments in the article at the bottom was, "This is a very good, very technical article. I just wished I knew it was written by a CMO and I wouldn't have read it." So ever since then, I've always thought, we need to make sure that we understand how marketing really supports the technical community, especially in open source projects and companies.
When you look at the larger CNC of ecosystem or landscape, which you cannot even put in one monitor because there are so many logos up there, what role do you see or what is specific problem for the industry? You did mention vCluster earlier, that you see Loft is solving or addressing for the whole CNC of ecosystem.
As we look at the modernization aspect in the industry, where customers were rebuilding applications as microservices, containerizing them, then looking at Kubernetes to manage that. There was a whole bunch of reasons for that. A lot of it was cost reduction and also simplifying maintenance. As that's gone on, I think a lot of companies now are spending a lot of time implementing Kubernetes and the modernization of their applications. But there now is a new phase that's coming in. You'll saw it first with all the rise of the telemetry type solutions, Grafana and others. So there's a real need to start now that this is the new method that we build and maintain and deploy applications. Telemetry became important. And I think the next thing that's becoming important is understanding new aspects like virtualizing Kubernetes clusters. That's why I think vClusters become very, very popular all of a sudden. And because it's that next phase of being able to solve cost reduction, security, and basically ease of deployment, ease of testing, ease of maintenance of applications that are out there. And I think this will be important because it's also the foundation upon which, as we add generative AI capabilities into applications, you're seeing this infrastructure is really important. You're not going to replace the infrastructure. You're going to keep that infrastructure and now add new capabilities to it. Add these Gen AI assistants to the applications you built. And the nice thing is, now that everything's been modularized into microservice architecture, you can more easily add in these capabilities. But you're going to do that on top of this cloud containerized microservice Kubernetes architecture. So new things like vCluster are going to support with that. The key one there too about that cost reduction is when you're building applications in a big environment, you're not just building applications that are all stovepipes. They're sharing different resources in the back, these CRDs. And that is one of the core things, and thinking of multi-tenancy as well, that vCluster really helps customers with. So summarizing that all again, we're at that next generation in all of the move to the cloud, containerization, Kubernetes, and it's going to be how do we better resolve the use of this investment we're now doing.
If we just look at CNC of course, it's all open source landscape. And the beauty of open source, sometimes I say open source doesn't really mean that you have to release your code base in open source. You can contribute in so many different ways to open source. When we talk about open source companies, how are you seeing their marketing programs? How are you seeing their approach to marketing is also evolving? Because like selling a product to a consumer is totally different than not necessarily selling, but showing off your product to developers. Also, it's a busy market. There are so many projects, developers get overwhelmed. So what is the right approach for marketing when it comes to open source communities and companies?
It's a good question, and it's an important question for anybody that's either a leading, they're an open source project, they're just developing, or they're deep into building their market, or they've got a market that now is it's plateauing and they want to grow from there. And it's going to sound familiar to marketers and to founders as well, but there's some new twists that are happening in the last months and the last couple of years. So it starts with the idea that worldwide, even major enterprises have moved beyond the concept of formal RFPs. We've known this for many years, more than a decade, where the formal RFP process was a team would be assembled to define the requirements needed by some new application. They would submit it out to a bunch of vendors. A bunch of vendors would then reply. There would be sales engagements behind the scenes as these were going on. And then a team would review these RFPs, select a solution, maybe go through a POC phase, and then maybe acquire it. So that fell away for two major reasons. One was because it was just so long. It took so long to get through those processes that the IT team was not responsive to the business. And the business was saying, look, we've got to have these things or we're going to go out of business. That was a lot of that, digital transformation used a lot of that language in that as well. But the other thing that really happened was just a cultural change where buyers no longer wanted to be sold. So buyers wanted to go and investigate. You can think of this as also being more than 20 years old, or at least a cultural evolution over 20 years. So people wanted to go and Google and find what they wanted versus being sold by something. In fact, if you were being sold, and this is very important to the marketing people, if you were being sold something, it meant you didn't want to buy it. As soon as something felt like it was a sales pitch, you didn't want it because you're like, I don't know if I can trust. If you see different regions of the world, you'll see ones like obviously North America has massive amounts of marketing, so many marketing messages that it makes people suspicious. So because of that, what's happened is we need to be first being able to be found. And so a lot of that went into like things like SEO, where you can easily be found so if somebody's Googling it. But that also has been around for a long time. The other thing then was to provide content that was useful because that helped for SEO. And so those were things like technical content marketing or content marketing strategies. So you built a lot of content that people could find. But the next phase I'm going to describe, it's going to relate to really open source. And one of the reasons why open source was so popular. Open source was popular because effectively it was the rise of the practitioner, the user, the developer of making choices, because they were going out and just organically looking for what they liked to use, discovering it, and then pushing procurement to acquire it. There's books like The New Kingmakers talking about how if you want to be, the successful companies were the ones that it was the developers that were choosing the product. And within those communities, it relates back to that article I wrote as a CMO and how it was not effective because even though it was very technically written, I was probably one of the leading tech people that knew this whole subject area at the time. It was not really going to be effective because people would be like, I'm just going to ignore it because it came from marketing. So that new evolution relates into this question: why are some open source projects more successful than others? And so if you think of open source, it's like all other kind of new technology evolutions. When a new technology comes out, you think of like the hype cycle. The Gartner has that hype cycle. Things come out, and only innovative early adopters will take it. Then it gets up into hype, and then we start thinking, well, it can't do everything, et cetera, et cetera. It goes through those phases. At the beginning of a new technology trend, a lot of vendors will come out. They'll be funded, startups, they'll go try to build it. But over time, it resolves down to just maybe 3 leaders, and of those, one is usually a strong leader. That's not more relevant than in open source. In open source, it happens. A lot of companies will pop up, but then only 1 or 2 will lead at the end. And there's a reason for that. And it's the idea of this. If you're a developer, a user practitioner, and you can quickly download and implement and use stuff, you're going to pick the thing that meets the specific need you have the best. There is no sale involved. There isn't even a marketing content that maybe influenced you to go do it. So the product has to be very, very good. It has to actually fit the need. And right, there's lots of, in fact, that last part's important because there's lots of good products, but if they don't fit a need, then it effectively doesn't have product market fit, because product market fit means it meets exactly a very specific need that people are willing to use, implement, and maybe even willing to buy. So how does it relate to this new change into marketing? Well, one is a topic we actually talked about just before this, and you mentioned it, and I'll make sure I wrote it down. It was marketing no longer needs to just talk. So if you think of it, marketing was always kind of pushing messages out. And it could be also like, you'll talk about inbound when leads are coming to your website and you nurture them and stuff like that. But it's the idea of listening. And this is something that engineering's been good at for years, which is listening and finding needs. Product management, very skilled at it. That's their job, is to go and learn how to listen. Marketing need to learn how to listen. What are the things and needs? What are the use cases that are attracting people that is open source? If this open source is suddenly viral, like we're seeing with vCluster, just all of a sudden, there's specific use cases that are requiring that. What are they? And then within those use cases, within that use case defines obviously initial features that cause them to want to use it, which is related to usually a problem statement that they were trying to solve. And then there were maybe even something different that's a buying trigger. So even though it might be something useful, there's a different trigger for buying. And then there's obviously objections that come out of that. So that's that listening point. But back to how the biggest shift, it's focusing on marketing can take its enormous resources, and they're very expensive resources in a company, both for a startup, for an open source, et cetera, a major company, and making sure that those resources are really dedicated to this. And this is the key to your whole question, how marketing's changed. It's to make sure that the marketing resources are dedicated to helping to support the developer or user. And so in some companies, I talked to a friend from Intel recently, and he was talking about, they call it dev for dev. So it's developers for developers, and actually communicating that. They're not doing any of that work to necessarily identify leads or to pitch, to really convince somebody that they need something. Instead, they're doing these 3 things. They're trying to drive awareness of a specific industry need, because sometimes people don't know about a need. Like, did people know that they need virtualization for Kubernetes? The second thing is awareness of specific projects that can solve that. The next phase after that awareness phase is really adoption phase. And it's really using your marketing resources to help people adopt it. That's how-to guides. It could be a lot of that technical marketing content that we talked about before. But it's helping to adopt in all types of ways. And actually in an altruistic way, thinking about how do we help you adopt it. And then the third, it's really to help support advocates, because if you've got a successful project and if they are virally downloading it and they are aware of it and like it, A lot of people in the community, they could be paying customers, but they could also be individuals that are using it in a consultancy project. They'd love to talk about your project. They love to go to a conference and talk or write a paper about it or contribute something back into the company. It doesn't have to be code. Everybody thinks that open source means people contribute code. It doesn't have to be code. It could be just advocacy and talking about you. So I think those three things of building that program really to developers and thinking around awareness to then adoption and then advocacy and just thinking marketing's program is really to support those. I think it's an enormous shift and you will be successful. And of course, it does mean a tight alliance with engineering because engineering in an open source project, engineering will win the day because they'll build that product that really meets that product market fit. So it's a little long in the answer, but there's a fundamental shift, and I'd love marketing people to kind of understand that, this focus on developer for developers. There will be, and this will make my summary on it, but there's also developer for revenue. So it's similar where they are more thinking about how do I support people that have now self-identified that, hey, you know what, we want this in production, we'd like to have something. That is a different phase, and that's now where it's acceptable because the customer has identified, hey, we're looking to buy this, can you help me? And that goes into this, which is still the best salespeople are people that don't sell people. They're basically finding people that have a need and making sure they bring to them a good solution. And so that's what these developer for revenue people will do. They want to provide all the technical resources to help you get that stuff into production, to answer all the questions you need, and to support you through that cycle to buy. So a little bit of a long answer, but I think it's a neat new shift into the industry.
I am actually happy that you brought these points, and I want to just dig a bit deeper into that. First of all, when you talk about this shift kind of or different approach that is needed, especially I think it can be applied even to the non-open source because as you rightly said, when it comes to a customer and a product, if you have a product that a customer really needs, you don't have to sell it. The customer will actually ask and beg you, can I have it? When you look at this whole open source or CNCF ecosystem, do you see that companies are actually embracing, first of all, they need to know that this change is needed? Because we often see companies continue to make wrong decisions, they missteps, and that not only tarnish their brand, it also kind of alienates their whole developer base. These can be anomalies. There will always be few companies like that. But in general, are you content with the shift as you would wish to see? Or you feel that no, companies need to do more to bring that sea change when it comes to marketing, especially in the open source and CNCF landscape?
First thing is the move to cost efficiency. It's across all things. If everybody's trying to reduce their cloud costs or optimize their cloud costs so it doesn't skyrocket out of control, that same attitude is across the board. So things like marketing have to learn to optimize. The second thing is if the industry continues as it does, it's the companies that have the marketing resources dedicated to supporting developers are going to win. And so to compete, they're going to need to probably make this shift. So they're really focusing on how to do that support. And again, it's a little bit different than just tech content marketing. It's really thinking, I'll say it again, the altruistic view of how are we supporting those customers, listening to them and then supporting what those developer needs are. And you're right, it is proprietary products as well. It's everybody. And within CNCF, it's a major shift. And even though you can count the number of years, if you think it's 8 years, 5 years, that this explosive shift has happened, the explosive shift is going to probably continue up the exponential curve because of the move to generative AI and the desire to kind of connect in. If you think of LangChain for J, or LangChain for J, it means companies can take existing applications and suddenly just quickly adapt them to generative capabilities. So it means your entire infrastructure is going to have to adapt quickly to that. It's great that we had this whole revolution to containerize microservices with Kubernetes and DevOps. That's been awesome. But as this whole explosive next round of explosive growth is going to happen, particularly with understanding platform engineering and FinOps and things like that, it behooves companies to be able to market to those developers because it's going to be very rapid buying decisions, selection decisions. And the best way to do that would be through this really developer to developer type idea.
What approach developers team should take to build this developer to developer advocacy at the same time developer for revenue programs, because that has to come the way you build the culture where developers also look at, I'm not doing something just to scratch my own itch, I'm doing something to solve someone's business problem.
That's true. And I think the way you asked it is about cross-cultural ideas. So within a company, it's the engineering team, it's the marketing team, it's the sales team, it's the customer success team, consulting teams, all kind of aligning on that idea. And I agree. So part of it is making sure that regardless of the company size, beware of this, stovepiping, even your annual or 18-month planning cycles where you build out your OKRs and your metrics for success. Thinking about how objectives that are defined or goals and objectives that are defined are cross-cultural and that they're focused on this idea. There's some basic foundational things that also have to be understood. So usually what you think about is what are foundational ideas we need to do, and then what are things that are like changes into the company that we need to do that can accelerate certain things. And I can explain some that we're doing internally. But foundational ideas would be building a communication channel to that community. So if that's Slack, a Slack channel for your users, that's good. But then within that Slack channel, communicating internally that it's not just the DevRel's position to go answer the Slack. It's across the team that need to be watching that and be responsive to it. There's obviously tools out there now, part of the foundation, that we can get that can be watching and can make sure it alerts the right people that there's new messages or questions from the community. But having a communication channel and then building that culture of being able to be responsive to them is really good. There's other foundational things like you do have to think about contributor agreements and other IP things that go on. But that's obviously down into the code, but it could also relate to other types of things that are developed. If somebody builds a demo for you online and it's really the community contributed it, making sure that that's the right contributor agreements are in place. That's a little bit random, but I think, again, the summary would be there. There's foundational thing. There's cross-cultural goals and metrics that you want to implement. And then ultimately, at the end, as a management team, you want to be able to watch across that and see how well you're doing. And this is now a little bit off, but what we did is we came up with 3 main goals for the company. And they effectively at the top was things around revenue. The second one was really things around building business awareness of what you're doing. And then the foundational goal was really around the community and building that. And then within each of those goals, there's objectives and there's some specific measures that we have with owners, right? It's very good to have owners for each, and then some KPIs, metrics that you want to achieve. But then doing regular review cycles, it's not that those goals are, if you don't achieve them, you don't get your annual bonus, or if you don't achieve them, you're in trouble. It's the idea that we want to have measures that everybody can look at and own and go, hey, am I getting that? Because if I'm not hitting that goal, it either means the metric was originally defined wrong, I don't have enough resources, I don't have enough skills, or it was the wrong objective to begin with. And so it's kind of back to the understanding of how to use Agile. It's to be able to quickly understand where am I at, or where are we at, and then make decisions as a team collaboratively on what you should do. So I think that planning cycle is something that's really good. I've got a whole article I wrote on 500-day planning that's useful, but it's cultural about using metrics to be able to monitor yourself and see how well you're doing.
When somebody is starting an open source company, what approaches they should take from the very beginning, very early on, for the marketing approach as well, so that in the mid of, they're like 5 years down the line, they're like, no, we have to change the license because you know what, we cannot make money from the existing open source license. So what would be your approach? Because not every creator of this company can have that mindset. Of course, down the line, they will hire a CMO, but when they start. So do you have any kind of playbook for them?
So, well, there's several. One is in the last, if we go back 20 years, and over the last 20 years, there was always this issue of you first started, if you're gonna choose the open source route, you would pick a very liberal license like an MIT or Apache license. And then as you evolved forward, you'd say, well, now that we've got a lot of adoption, we need to monetize this. We might have a community edition, which is a commercial license, and then we have the liberal open source. Now, there's tons and tons of ideology between that's evolved over time, and there's never been a final answer, because even today there's worry, like if you have even a moderately copyleft license, that maybe some large companies can take advantage of that and just include your product in theirs, because what do they care? They're basically getting paid for the overall platform, maybe up to billions of dollars, and so they can even hire engineers that are bigger than your small startup that can support that, and it fits in their ROI. So there's concerns about how to restrict it enough. So what I say to most people is, when you first start the company, your first desire is to build product market fit, and every VC is going to say the same thing. They want to see product market fit. But it seems like it's more difficult. Let's say it this way: it's more difficult than anybody can believe. Otherwise, we'd all do it. And I remember, this is a funny side story, but I remember being in grad school and we were studying all these case studies about companies, and I had asked the professor, who'd been a former assistant secretary of education. So it was interesting because this person had very high level past. But they said, the reason we study these case studies of companies that have failed is because we can't teach you how to be successful 100% of the time, but we can teach you how to fail 100% of the time. And so that's why we teach a lot of these past errors and faults, so you can understand them. And so what it gets back to here, which is at the beginning, when you're trying to build product market fit, you have to think about, you have an innovative idea, you're trying to find and ask questions with as many people that will give you feedback at the beginning. It could be up to 50 different potential customers that fit within what you believe is your ideal customer profile. And you'll get that feedback, and then you're going to build something you think is pretty good. And now you've got to get a set of what would be called, some people call them design partners, but they're the initial customers that are very innovative, and they don't care that you're not an already existing big company. They know you're not, and they're willing to kind of work with you as you develop that product. And so they come in, they help you get through the next phases, and you iterate your product very rapidly with them. And then at the end, you should have a fairly good product that people are willing to buy. So there's that. And how does that then combine with your licensing question? And the answer is, at the beginning, you want a fairly open license. It's a really tough one to say if you want fully like an MIT license or if you want to do something more restrictive. There's debate in there right now, and I think there is no right answer. And I've probably been a part of at least 50 different open source projects that were fairly successful, and they've gone through things. You can shift that license, so there may be the fact that there's no wrong answer, because even if you've gone along and there's all types of adoption, and if some large company did decide to take your product and embed it in, you can always convert that. You look at what happened with Hudson and Jenkins, where they just completely shifted and they forked off and they were able to bring the community with them. If you're the founder of the thing, you can do those radical different things. So I'd say in the end, there is no final answer. Your goal at the beginning is just get viral adoption and work to find those design partners, if it's the word, that are helping you to build the right features that grow. And at some point, you'll know now's the time to really grow or grow monetization around it. In fact, if you're going down the VC route anyway, most VCs are wanting that. They're wanting to see the viral adoption, the product market fit, more than the revenue, particularly in those early years. And if they have it, now you can fund that, and there's lots of choices and changes you can make at that point. But also, this is really important one. Boy, this is a really important one. It's about the mistakes, like that professor said. The biggest mistake is to pull features away from the community. It always is painful. The best thing is always to think that if you're at a place that you want to suddenly create something that's more along the lines of a enterprise edition versus a community edition, it should always be you're adding something new that's innovative and desirable and usable that people are willing to pay for, than trying to take something away from the community. It is the worst thing to do. And we've seen that with lots of different companies that did that, and it hurt them because the community, I'll say this with also open source, and it's no insult. Within the open source world, it's extremely fickle, which means you can be very successful and popular today, and be suddenly not successful tomorrow because of a mistake like that. And so it's always better this goes back to that developer for developer or your company's focus on developers. We want to serve that customer base, we want to serve those technical audience as best as possible. And that's why it behooves us, if we want to charge for something, that we build something new and innovative that we bring you to and that we're bringing an offering to you.
Paul, thank you so much for taking time out today. And this is really important. Folks don't understand that, especially in the open source. As you rightly said, they feel that, hey, it's open source, everybody will come and adopt. But there's a competition within the open source. There are so many great products. So you do have to stand out, shine, and you do need, these kind of partnership that you mentioned, with influencers or advocates, and you have to change your whole approach towards marketing. And it has to go both ways. It's cultural shift, as you rightly mentioned. I'm so happy to have you today on the show, and I would love to have you back on the show. So thank you for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.